The rejected Omega was chosen for the moon heir, but she was hiding the one secret that could destroy everything. The knife came out of nowhere. Elena Voss felt the cold edge press against her throat before she even saw the hand holding it. She had been walking home from the market, her arms full of bread and dried herbs, when a shadow pulled her into the narrow space between two stone houses. The bread fell. The herbs scattered across the mud. "Say nothing," the voice hissed behind her, "or this ends tonight." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break her ribs. She could smell wet leather and old smoke on the stranger's coat. His grip was firm, practiced, the grip of someone who had done this before. "I have nothing," Elena whispered. "Take the food. Take my coin. Just let me go." "This isn't about coin." The blade pressed harder, just enough to sting. "It's about who you are, and what you carry inside you." Elena's breath caught. No one was supposed to know. No one was ever supposed to know. "I don't know what you mean," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. The man behind her laughed, low and humorless. "Everyone in Blackthorn thinks you're nothing, a rejected Omega, damaged, unwanted. But I know better. I know what runs in your blood, Elena Voss. And so do the people who sent me." Footsteps echoed at the end of the alley. Someone was coming. The man cursed under his breath, shoved her hard against the wall, and disappeared into the dark before she could turn around. Elena stood there, shaking, her back pressed to the cold stone, gasping for air that would not come easily. She touched her throat where the blade had rested and found no blood, only the memory of fear sinking into her skin. She did not report it. She could not. Reporting it meant questions, and questions meant the truth might slip out, the truth she had spent her whole life burying deep enough that even she sometimes forgot it existed. By the time she reached her small room above the tannery, her hands still would not stop trembling. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at the wall, replaying the stranger's words. What runs in your blood? Someone knew. Someone out there knew what she was, and that knowledge alone could end her life if it reached the wrong ears. Elena had lived in Blackthorn territory for as long as she could remember, though not always in this room, and not always under this name. She had grown up watching other Omegas laugh together, walk with confidence, receive gentle attention from Alphas who wanted them. She had watched all of it from the outside, like pressing her face against a window she was never allowed to open. She was called defective, broken. The word rejected followed her like a shadow, though no one could ever say exactly what she had been rejected from. She simply was not chosen, not wanted, not seen as valuable in a world that measured an Omega's worth by how eagerly an Alpha claimed her. She told herself it did not matter. She had built a quiet life. She worked with her hands, sewing and mending cloth for merchants who paid fairly, and asked no questions. She had one friend in the world, a sharp-tongued young woman named Ivy Lang who ran a flower stall near the square, and that was enough. It had to be enough, because anything more invited danger. But tonight had shattered that fragile peace. Someone had found her. Someone had connected her false name to a truth so dangerous that being rejected by pack and society had actually protected her all these years. Being invisible had kept her alive. The next morning, Elena walked through the square with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, scanning every face, searching for anyone who lingered too long near her stall or watched her from across the street. Ivy noticed immediately. "You look like you saw a ghost," Ivy said, arranging a bundle of white flowers. "I might have," Elena said quietly. "What happened?" Elena hesitated. She wanted to tell her, wanted to release the fear pressing against her chest, but some instinct held her back. If she spoke it aloud, it would become real in a way she could not undo. "Nothing," she said instead. "Just tired. I did not sleep well." Ivy studied her for a long moment, but did not press further. She had learned, over the years of their friendship, that Elena carried silences the way other people carried scars, and prying only made things worse. The morning passed in a blur of customers and small talk, none of which Elena could focus on. Her mind kept circling back to the alley, to the blade, to the words that had followed her home like a curse. Someone was hunting for a secret buried so deep that even the ground it was buried in had forgotten its shape. By afternoon, a strange energy moved through the square. People whispered in tight clusters, their eyes bright with excitement Elena did not understand. She caught fragments of conversation as she passed. The Lunar Council announced it this morning. A ceremony, they say, unlike anything in a generation. Choosing a companion for the moon heir himself. Elena's stomach tightened at the mention of the moon heir. Every Omega in the territory knew his name, spoken with equal parts admiration and fear. Cale Draven, heir to the most powerful bloodline in the region, was said to be as controlled as he was formidable, a man who ruled with calculation rather than passion. Alphas envied his strength. Omegas dreamed of catching his attention, though few ever did, because he was famously indifferent to the usual games of courtship. "They are holding a selection," Ivy said, appearing at Elena's side with wide eyes. "All Omegas from every pack under Blackthorn's protection are required to attend. Even us. Why would they want someone like me there?" Elena asked, though a cold unease was already creeping through her. "Because it is required," Ivy said. "Every Omega, without exception. The Lunar Council does not make requests. They make demands." That evening, Elena sat alone in her room, staring at the small mirror hanging crookedly on her wall. She barely recognized the tired, guarded face looking back at her. Attending the ceremony meant standing before powerful eyes trained to notice things that ordinary people missed. It meant risking exposure at the exact moment someone else was already hunting for her secret. She considered fleeing the territory altogether. She had done it before, more than once, moving from town to town whenever the walls closed in too tightly around her past. But this time felt different. This time, refusing to appear might draw more attention than attending quietly and disappearing into the crowd. She told herself that was the safer path. Attend, remain unnoticed, then vanish once the danger passed. She almost believed it. The day of the ceremony arrived with a sky the color of pale silver, clouds stretched thin, like fabric pulled too tight. Omegas from every corner of Blackthorn's territory gathered in the grand courtyard outside the Lunar Council's hall, a place Elena had only ever seen from a distance. Marble columns rose high above them, carved with symbols of moons in every phase, and guards in dark uniforms stood at careful intervals, watching the crowd with unreadable expressions. Elena stood near the back, doing her best to blend into the sea of unfamiliar faces. Ivy stood beside her, practically vibrating with nervous excitement, though she had already been told, gently but firmly, that she was unlikely to be chosen for anything beyond simple attendance. "Do you think he will even look at any of us?" Ivy whispered. "They say he barely speaks during these things." "I hope he does not look at me at all," Elena murmured. A hush fell over the courtyard as the great doors of the hall opened. Several council members emerged first, dressed in deep blue robes trimmed with silver thread, their faces stern and unreadable. Behind them came a figure Elena recognized instantly, though she had never seen him in person before. Cale Draven moved like someone who had never once doubted his place in the world. He was tall, with dark hair pulled back neatly, and eyes the color of a storm about to break. He wore simple clothing compared to the council members around him, yet somehow commanded more attention than all of them combined. His expression was calm, almost bored, as though this entire ceremony was an obligation he tolerated rather than desired. A council elder stepped forward, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "Omegas of Blackthorn, you stand before the future of our territory. Today, one among you will be chosen to walk beside the Moon Heir, to stand as his companion through the trials ahead. This is not merely an honor. It is a bond that will shape the future of our people." Elena felt her pulse quicken with dread rather than hope. She kept her eyes lowered, praying to remain unseen, praying that whatever instinct had drawn a stranger's blade to her throat would not also draw the Moon Heir's gaze. The selection began. One by one, Omegas were called forward, their names read aloud by council attendants. Their brief presentations met with polite nods or occasional interest from Cale, who observed each one with the same detached calm. Elena watched as beautiful, confident young women stepped forward, some trembling with hope, others radiating quiet certainty that they would be chosen. None of them were chosen. Cale's expression remained unreadable through each presentation, his gaze sweeping the crowd rather than settling on any single face before him. Then, without warning, his eyes moved past the row of hopeful Omegas and landed directly on Elena, standing near the back where she believed herself hidden. Time seemed to slow. Elena felt every eye in the courtyard shift toward her, though she knew that was impossible, that surely only Cale was looking her way. But his gaze held steady, unblinking, as though he had found something he had been searching for without realizing it. "You," he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the silent courtyard. "Step forward." Whispers erupted immediately. Elena's feet felt rooted to the ground, her mind screaming at her to run, to disappear into the crowd, to become invisible again the way she had spent her entire life learning to do. But every guard's eye was now on her as well, and running would only confirm whatever suspicion had drawn a blade to her throat 2 nights before. Slowly, she stepped forward, her legs unsteady beneath her. The crowd parted, murmuring, some faces curious, others openly disdainful. She had heard the whispers about herself for years. Defective, rejected, damaged goods. She could feel those same judgments radiating from the crowd now, mixed with confusion at why the Moon Heir himself would call forward someone so clearly beneath consideration. She stopped a respectful distance from Cale, keeping her eyes low, her heart hammering so loudly she feared he might hear it. "Your name," he said. "Elena Voss," she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered across his face, so brief she almost missed it. Recognition, perhaps, or something closer to confusion, as though her name meant something to him that he could not quite place. "Elena Voss," he repeated slowly, testing the name on his tongue. "You are the one they call rejected." The word landed like a slap, though he had not spoken it unkindly, simply factually, the way one might state the weather. "Yes," she said, unable to deny it. The council elder beside Cale leaned forward, his expression tight with concern. "My lord, surely you understand the implications of such a choice. This Omega carries no formal recommendation. Her records are incomplete. Perhaps another selection would better serve." "I did not ask for your opinion," Cale said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of finality that silenced the elder immediately. He turned his attention back to Elena, studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear entirely. She could not understand what he was searching for in her face, could not begin to guess why his gaze lingered so long on someone the rest of the world had already dismissed. "There is something about you," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I cannot explain it, but I know it the moment I see it." Elena's breath caught in her throat. If he truly saw something, if his instincts were leading him toward the very secret she had spent her life hiding, then this ceremony was no longer simply dangerous. It was the beginning of something that could unravel everything she had built to survive. "I choose her," Cale announced, turning to face the stunned crowd and council members alike. "Elena Voss will be my companion." The courtyard erupted into a storm of whispers, some scandalized, others simply bewildered. Ivy's hand found Elena's arm, gripping tight with a mixture of shock and fear. Elena barely felt it. Her entire body had gone numb, caught between the impossible honor being placed upon her and the impossible danger it now guaranteed. Somewhere out there, a stranger with a blade already knew her secret, and now, standing beside the most powerful man in the territory, that secret had never been more likely to be discovered, nor more dangerous if it ever was. As the council attendants moved to guide her toward the hall, toward a life she had never wanted and could not refuse, Elena caught Cale watching her once more, his storm-colored eyes narrowed slightly with quiet, unspoken questions. She smiled as convincingly as she could manage, while inside, a single thought echoed louder than anything else. He does not know what he has just chosen, and if he ever finds out, it may cost them both everything. Elena barely slept that night. The room she had been given inside the Lunar Council's residence was larger than her entire old apartment above the tannery, with a bed soft enough to swallow her whole, and windows that overlooked gardens she had only ever imagined. None of it comforted her. Every shadow in the unfamiliar space felt like a threat. Every creak of the old stone walls sounded like footsteps approaching her door. She kept thinking about the man in the alley. What runs in your blood? He had known her real identity, or at least enough of it to threaten her with it. And now she was living inside the most watched building in the entire territory, surrounded by guards, council members, and a man whose eyes seemed to see straight through the careful mask she had worn for years. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find a woman with sharp cheekbones and cool, assessing eyes standing in the hallway, dressed in the deep blue robes of a council attendant. "I am Vera Holt," the woman said without warmth. "I have been assigned to prepare you for your role as the Moon Heir's companion. You will need proper clothing, proper training and etiquette, and a thorough understanding of what is expected of you." "I do not need training to be myself," Elena said carefully, though she immediately regretted the sharpness in her tone. Vera's expression did not change. "You are no longer simply yourself. You represent the Moon Heir now. Every mistake you make reflects on him. I suggest you remember that." Elena swallowed her pride and nodded. Attracting less attention, not more, remained her only priority, and arguing with a council attendant on her very first morning would accomplish nothing except making enemies she could not afford. The following days passed in a whirlwind of new expectations. Vera drilled her on proper greetings for visiting dignitaries, correct posture during council sessions, and the delicate art of saying nothing meaningful while appearing gracious and engaged. Elena absorbed it all with quiet determination, though every lesson felt like another layer of armor being fitted over a body that only wanted to run. She saw little of Cale during those first days. He remained occupied with council matters, disappearing into meetings that lasted from morning until well past sunset. When their paths did cross, brief moments in hallways or during shared meals, he studied her with the same quiet intensity he had shown during the selection ceremony, as though still trying to solve a puzzle he could not quite name. "You are quieter than most people expect," he said one evening, finding her alone in the residence's library, surrounded by shelves of books she had never dared imagine touching. "I did not expect anyone to want to hear from me," Elena replied honestly. Cale's expression shifted, something almost like curiosity softening the sharp lines of his face. "Why did the council call you rejected? I have heard the word used, but no one explains why." Elena's chest tightened. This was the question she had feared most, the one that could unravel everything if answered incorrectly. "I do not fit easily into pack structures," she said carefully. "My scent, my presentation, it does not align with what alphas typically seek. I was told long ago that I was unlikely to ever be chosen for anything meaningful. It was not a lie exactly. It simply was not the whole truth." Cale studied her for a long moment, his storm-colored eyes narrowing slightly. "And yet I chose you." "Yes," Elena said softly. "I still do not understand why." "Neither do I," Cale admitted, an honesty in his voice that surprised her. "But something drew me to you the moment I saw you standing in that courtyard. I have never experienced anything like it before." Elena did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing at all, letting the silence stretch between them, until Cale eventually excused himself, leaving her alone with thoughts that spun faster than she could control. Word of her selection had spread quickly through the territory, and not everyone received the news with kindness. Whispers followed her through the residence's hallways, servants exchanging glances when they thought she was not looking, council members speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever she approached. The word rejected seemed to follow her from her old life into this new one, refusing to release its grip. One afternoon, while walking through the gardens seeking a moment of solitude, Elena encountered a young Omega named Mira Kessler, one of the women who had also stood in the courtyard during the selection ceremony. Mira's beauty was undeniable, her confidence radiating from every graceful movement, and her expression as she approached Elena carried none of the warmth Elena might have hoped for. "I suppose congratulations are in order," Mira said, her tone carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "Though I cannot begin to understand what the moon heir saw in you." "Neither can I," Elena said honestly, hoping honesty might diffuse whatever tension was building. Mira's eyes narrowed slightly. "Many of us worked our entire lives preparing for a moment like that ceremony. Training, presentation, cultivating every quality an alpha of his standing would desire, and he chose someone who never even wanted to be there." "I understand your frustration," Elena said. "I truly do. This was never something I sought." "Then perhaps you should refuse it," Mira suggested, her voice deceptively gentle. "Step aside. Allow someone more suited to the role to take your place. It would spare everyone a great deal of difficulty." Elena studied the other woman carefully, sensing something beneath the surface of her words, something closer to genuine threat than simple jealousy. "Is that truly what you believe would be best? Or is there another reason you want me gone?" Mira's expression flickered, just briefly, before smoothing back into practiced elegance. "I only want what is best for the territory. Surely you understand that a companion with no family history, no verified lineage, brings unnecessary risk to the moon heir's position." The words settled into Elena's stomach like stones. Mira knew something, or at least suspected something, about the gaps in Elena's history. It was impossible to know how much, but the implication alone was enough to send a fresh wave of fear through her. "I have work to attend to," Elena said, forcing calm into her voice as she turned to leave the garden. "Of course," Mira called after her. "Do be careful, Elena. Secrets have a way of finding daylight eventually, and when they do, they rarely spare the people trying hardest to hide them." Elena's hands trembled as she walked briskly back toward the residence, Mira's words echoing louder with every step. Between the stranger in the alley and now Mira's veiled threats, it felt as though the walls she had built around her past were crumbling from every direction at once. That evening, unable to shake her unease, Elena sought out Ivy, sending word through a council messenger asking her friend to visit. Ivy arrived within the hour, her eyes wide as she took in the grandeur of the residence's entrance hall. "This place is enormous," Ivy whispered, as Elena led her toward a quiet sitting room. "How are you even managing all of this?" "Barely," Elena admitted once they were alone. The door closed firmly behind them. Ivy, something happened before the ceremony. Someone attacked me in an alley, near the market. He knew things about me, things no one should know. Ivy's playful expression vanished instantly, replaced by genuine concern. What kind of things? Elena hesitated, the words catching in her throat. Even now, even with her closest friend, the instinct to protect her secret ran deeper than her need for comfort or support. I do not know exactly what he meant, she lied, but it frightened me terribly. And today, one of the other Omegas made comments suggesting she knows something about my past that I have never shared with anyone. Do you think they are connected, the man in the alley and this woman? I do not know, Elena admitted, but I fear whatever is happening is far larger than a simple selection ceremony gone wrong. Ivy reached out, taking Elena's trembling hands into her own. Whatever this is, you are not facing it alone. I do not care how grand this residence is or how powerful the moon heir might be. You are still my friend, and I intend to help you however I can. Elena felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, grateful for a loyalty that asked nothing in return. Thank you, Ivy. I only wish I understood enough to know what kind of help I even need. Later that night, long after Ivy had returned home and the residence had settled into quiet darkness, Elena found herself unable to sleep once again. She wandered the halls softly, careful not to disturb the guards stationed at various intervals, until she found herself standing before a portrait she had not noticed before, hanging in a rarely used corridor near the eastern wing. The painting depicted a woman with familiar features, dark hair, and eyes so similar to Elena's own that she felt a chill spread through her entire body. Beneath the portrait, a small brass plaque read a name Elena had never expected to see displayed so prominently within the Lunar Council's own residence. Dara Voss. Her mother's name. Elena's breath caught painfully in her chest as she stared at the portrait, trying desperately to understand why an image of her long-dead mother hung within these walls, and what connection her mother might have had to the very bloodline she had spent her entire life running from. Footsteps approached from behind her, and Elena spun quickly, finding Kale standing several paces away, watching her with an unreadable expression. You recognize her, he said quietly. It was not a question. Elena's heart pounded against her ribs. Who is she to this residence? Kale stepped closer, his storm-colored eyes studying the portrait, then shifting back to Elena's face, comparing them with an intensity that made her want to flee. She was someone important, many years ago, someone the council has spent generations trying to forget existed. Why? Elena whispered, though some part of her already feared the answer. Because she belonged to a bloodline the moon lineage was told no longer existed, Kale said slowly. A bloodline believed to have been erased entirely, generations ago. Elena felt the ground tilt beneath her feet, the careful walls she had built around her past, finally beginning to crack under weight she could no longer control. That cannot be true, Elena said, though her voice betrayed the panic rising inside her. You must be mistaken. I have never heard my mother's name connected to anything involving your lineage. Kale studied her carefully, his gaze searching her face for something she desperately hoped he would not find. The resemblance between you and this portrait is not something easily dismissed as coincidence, Elena. I noticed it the moment I saw your face in the courtyard, though I could not place why it felt so familiar. Elena forced herself to breathe slowly, steadying the tremor threatening to overtake her hands. Perhaps she simply resembled someone important. Many people share similar features by chance. Perhaps, Kale said, though his tone made it clear he did not believe it. Or perhaps there is more to your history than what the council records reveal. Records that, I might add, are remarkably sparse when it comes to your background. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Elena knew she needed to steer this conversation away from dangerous territory before Kale's suspicions solidified into something neither of them could undo. I grew up without much family, she said, choosing her words with careful precision. My mother passed when I was young. I never knew much about her life before me. It would not surprise me if there were gaps in whatever records exist. Kale's expression remained thoughtful, though he did not press further. I suppose that is possible, he said eventually, though I intend to look further into the history of this portrait. If your mother truly has some connection to this residence, I would like to understand what that connection means. Elena forced a small, tired smile. Of course. I hope you find whatever answers you are searching for. Inside, her heart hammered with dread. Every word Kale spoke pulled them both closer to a truth capable of destroying everything, a truth she had spent her entire life burying beneath false names and quiet invisibility. Over the following days, Elena found herself increasingly unable to escape the weight of her own history. Strange, fragmented memories began surfacing unbidden, triggered by small details around the residence. The particular scent of the gardens, the pattern carved into certain doorways, sensations that felt achingly familiar despite Elena never having set foot in this place before. One afternoon, while assisting with preparations for an upcoming council gathering, Elena's hand brushed against an old ceremonial pendant displayed within a glass case in the residence's main hall. The moment her fingers made contact with the glass, a sharp, involuntary gasp escaped her lips as a memory flashed through her mind with startling clarity. A woman's voice, gentle but urgent, whispering words Elena could not fully understand. "Hide what you are, my darling. Never let them see the truth. Promise me you will survive, whatever it costs you." Elena stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a nearby vase, her breathing ragged as the memory faded as quickly as it had appeared. "Are you unwell?" a nearby attendant asked, concern evident in her voice. "I am fine," Elena said quickly, forcing composure back into her expression. "Simply lightheaded. I have not eaten properly today." The attendant nodded, though her expression suggested she did not entirely believe the explanation. Elena excused herself as gracefully as she could manage, retreating to her room where she could finally allow the fear coursing through her body to show fully on her face. The memory had felt so real, so vivid, that she could not dismiss it as mere imagination. Somewhere deep within her mind, buried beneath years of careful suppression, real memories of her past existed, memories her mother had apparently worked hard to help her forget. That evening, restless and unable to settle her racing thoughts, Elena sought out the residence's healer, an elderly man named Silas Bren who had tended to injuries and illnesses within the Lunar Council's walls for decades. She found him in his small study, surrounded by shelves of dried herbs and ancient medical texts. "I wonder if you might help me with something," Elena said carefully, closing the door behind her for privacy. "I have been experiencing strange memories lately, fragments that feel real, though I cannot place when they occurred." Silas studied her with kind, knowing eyes, gesturing for her to sit across from him. "Memory suppression is not uncommon among certain bloodlines," he said slowly, watching her reaction carefully, particularly bloodlines carrying abilities considered dangerous by those in power. Sometimes, protective suppression is placed upon a child at a young age, hidden so deeply that even the child forgets it exists, until circumstances trigger its unraveling. Elena's breath caught. Why would someone suppress a child's memories? "To protect them," Silas said simply. "If a bloodline is being hunted, suppressing a child's abilities and memories of their true heritage can be the only way to ensure their survival. It allows the child to move through the world undetected, safe from those who might otherwise seek to eliminate them." Elena felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she fought desperately to keep her composure. And if that suppression begins to fail, what happens then? Silas's expression grew serious. Then the true nature of the individual begins to surface, whether they wish it to or not. Abilities long dormant may awaken, memories long buried may resurface, and unfortunately, such awakening rarely happens quietly. It draws attention, from allies and enemies alike. "Is there any way to prevent it?" Elena asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. "Sometimes," Silas said, "but suppression that is held for as long as yours apparently has, judging by your reaction, tends to be nearly impossible to maintain indefinitely, especially once triggered by strong emotional bonds or significant life changes." Elena thought immediately of Kale, of the strange, undeniable pull she had felt toward him since the moment of her selection, a connection neither of them fully understood. Was her bond with him the very thing accelerating whatever suppression her mother had placed upon her all those years ago? "Thank you for your honesty," Elena said quietly, rising from her seat. "I appreciate your discretion in this matter." "Of course," Silas said gently. "Whatever you are carrying, child, I sense it is heavier than most burdens I have witnessed in my many years here. Be careful who you trust with it." Elena left the healer's study with more questions than answers, her mind spinning with implications she could barely begin to process. If her mother had suppressed dangerous memories and abilities to protect her, then the bloodline Kale suspected her of belonging to was not simply a matter of resemblance or coincidence. It was real, and it was awakening, whether Elena wanted it to or not. Days later, during a quiet evening walk through the gardens, Elena felt an unusual warmth spreading through her palms, a sensation unlike anything she had experienced before. She stopped beside a small fountain, staring down at her own hands in confusion, as a faint silvery glow began emanating from her fingertips, barely visible in the gathering darkness. Panic surged through her immediately. She clenched her hands into fists, willing the strange glow to disappear. And after several tense moments, it faded entirely, leaving her breathless and shaken. "What is happening to me?" she whispered to the empty garden, though no answer came. She could no longer deny it. Whatever suppression her mother had placed upon her years ago was beginning to fail, exactly as Silas had warned, and with every passing day spent near Cale, near the very bloodline her existence apparently threatened, that suppression seemed to weaken further. Returning to her room that night, Elena found a small folded note slipped beneath her door, written in unfamiliar, precise handwriting. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, reading the brief, chilling message within. "We know what you are becoming. Leave before it is too late for both of you." Elena stared at the note for a long time, her mind racing through possibilities. Someone within the residence itself was watching her. Someone aware of her awakening abilities and willing to threaten her in order to protect secrets she was only beginning to understand herself. She thought of Mira's veiled warnings in the garden, of the mysterious attacker in the alley before the ceremony, of the portrait bearing her mother's name hidden within these very walls. Everything felt connected, threads of a larger conspiracy weaving tighter around her with every passing day. Elena folded the note carefully, hiding it within the lining of her traveling bag, uncertain who she could trust enough to share this newest threat with. Not Ivy, whose safety she refused to endanger further. Not Cale, whose growing suspicion already threatened to unravel everything she had spent her life hiding. For now, she would need to face this alone, carrying secrets heavy enough to destroy the fragile peace she had only just begun to find within these unfamiliar walls. Cale stood alone in the council archive room, a candle flickering beside stacks of old records that had not been touched in years. Dust coated the shelves, and the air smelled of aged parchment and forgotten history. He had come here seeking answers about the portrait of Dara Voss, and what he found instead troubled him far more than he anticipated. The records confirmed what he already suspected. Dara Voss had once belonged to a bloodline known as the Silverkin, a lineage believed extinct for nearly 3 decades, wiped out during a violent conflict with the Moon lineage generations ago. The Silverkin were said to possess rare abilities tied directly to lunar energy, abilities that once rivaled even the Moon lineage's own power, making them both valuable allies and dangerous threats depending on the political climate of the time. According to the records, the conflict ended when the last known Silverkin bloodline was eliminated during a council-sanctioned purge, meant to secure the Moon lineage's uncontested claim to power. Cale's own grandfather had overseen that purge personally, an act the family rarely discussed, buried beneath decades of careful silence. If Elena truly carried Silverkin blood, if her resemblance to Dara Voss was more than coincidence, then her very existence contradicted everything Cale's family had claimed for 30 years. And more troubling still, it meant someone within the Silverkin bloodline had survived that purge, hidden successfully enough to escape detection for decades. Cale closed the old record book slowly, his mind racing through implications he was not yet ready to fully accept. He thought of Elena's guarded expressions, her careful, measured answers whenever he asked about her past, the way she flinched almost imperceptibly whenever certain topics arose. All of it now made a troubling kind of sense. He needed more information before confronting her directly. Rushing this conversation, before understanding the full scope of what he was dealing with, risked losing whatever fragile trust had begun forming between them since her selection. That evening, Cale sought counsel from Edwin Marsh, an older council member known for his discretion and long memory of the territory's more complicated history. He found Edwin in his private study, reviewing correspondence by candlelight. "I need to ask you about the Silverkin purge," Cale said without preamble, closing the study door behind him. Edwin's expression shifted immediately, wariness replacing his previously relaxed posture. "That is a chapter of our history best left undisturbed, my lord. Why do you ask about it now?" "Because I believe there may be a survivor," Cale said carefully. "Someone living within our own territory, unaware of what she truly is, or perhaps aware and hiding it deliberately." Edwin set down his correspondence, his face paling slightly. "This is dangerous territory, Cale. If word spread that a Silverkin bloodline survived, certain factions within the council would demand immediate action. Factions that still believe the purge was justified, and would not hesitate to finish what was started decades ago. Then perhaps those factions need to understand that continuing such violence serves no one," Cale said firmly. "The Silverkin were never truly a threat to our lineage. They were eliminated out of fear and political convenience, not genuine danger." "You speak as though you have already made up your mind about protecting this survivor," Edwin observed carefully. Cale hesitated, surprised by his own certainty. "I believe I have," he admitted. though I have not yet confirmed her identity beyond reasonable doubt." "Her identity," Edwin repeated slowly, understanding dawning across his weathered features. "You are speaking of your chosen companion, are you not?" Cale did not answer immediately, though his silence confirmed everything Edwin needed to know. "My lord," Edwin said gently, "if this is true, you must proceed with extreme caution. There are members of this council who would see her eliminated the moment her identity is confirmed, regardless of your personal feelings toward her. Corwin Hale, in particular, has never forgiven the Silverkin for the conflicts of his youth. He lost family during that war. His hatred runs deeper than simple political convenience." Cale's jaw tightened at the mention of Corwin Hale, one of the council's most influential and unyielding elders. If Corwin discovered Elena's true identity before Cale found a way to protect her, the consequences could prove catastrophic. "Thank you for your honesty, Edwin," Cale said finally. "I trust this conversation remains between us." "Of course, my lord," Edwin said, though worry remained etched clearly across his face. "But be warned, secrets within these walls rarely remain buried for long. If you suspect the truth, others likely suspect it as well." Cale left the study with Edwin's warning echoing heavily in his mind. He needed to speak with Elena directly, carefully, in a way that would not frighten her into silence or flight, but would instead encourage the honesty he desperately needed if he hoped to protect her from what was coming. He found her later that evening in the residence's smaller reading room, curled into a chair near the fireplace, a book resting unread in her lap while her gaze remained fixed distantly on the flickering flames. "May I join you?" Cale asked softly, not wanting to startle her from her thoughts. Elena looked up, surprise flickering briefly across her face before she nodded, gesturing toward the chair across from her. "Of course." Cale settled into the seat, studying her carefully in the warm firelight. Exhaustion shadowed her eyes, and something else, something closer to fear, though she attempted to mask it with practiced composure. "You seem troubled," he observed gently. "It has been a difficult adjustment," Elena admitted, her voice careful and measured. "This world is very different from the one I am accustomed to." Cale nodded slowly, choosing his next words with deliberate care. "Elena, I want you to know that whatever burdens you carry, whatever truths you feel you must hide, I do not intend to use them against you." Elena's eyes widened slightly, alarm flashing across her features before she managed to smooth her expression back into careful neutrality. "I do not understand what you mean." "I think you do," Cale said, his tone gentle but firm. "I researched the portrait of Dara Voss. I know about the Silverkin bloodline, and the purge that supposedly ended it 30 years ago." Elena's breath caught audibly, her hands tightening around the edges of her unread book. "Cale, please." "I am not here to condemn you," Cale interrupted softly. "I am here because I believe you may be in danger. Danger that grows with every day your identity remains a secret, waiting to be discovered by the wrong people." Tears welled in Elena's eyes despite her obvious effort to hold them back. "If what you suspect is true, and I am not saying it is, revealing it would mean my death. The Silverkin were hunted for a reason, whether or not that reason was justified. Your own council would demand my elimination the moment they confirmed it." "Not while I have breath in my body," Cale said, his voice carrying quiet, fierce determination. "I will not allow that to happen, Elena. Whatever you are, whatever bloodline runs through your veins, it does not change what I have come to feel toward you these past weeks." Elena finally allowed a single tear to escape, tracing a slow path down her cheek. "You barely know me, Cale. How can you make such promises based on so little?" "Because something drew me to you the moment I saw you in that courtyard," Cale said softly. "Something I cannot fully explain, though I suspect it runs deeper than simple attraction or curiosity. Perhaps it is connected to whatever ancient bond once existed between our bloodlines, before fear and violence tore them apart." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for any hint of deception, finding only quiet, steady sincerity in return. "If I confirm your suspicions," she said slowly, "you must understand the danger does not end with my identity alone. There are abilities awakening within me, abilities I cannot yet control, and there are people already searching for me, people who know what I am becoming even before I fully understand it myself. Then we face it together," Cale said simply. "Whatever comes next, you will not face it alone any longer." For the first time since her selection, Elena felt a small, fragile sense of hope beginning to take root within her chest. Hope that perhaps she had finally found someone willing to stand beside her, rather than judge her for a truth she never chose to carry. But even as that hope bloomed, a darker certainty settled alongside it. Corwin Hale, and whoever else remained loyal to the purge that had destroyed her bloodline decades ago would not simply allow her existence to continue unchallenged once the truth became known. And the note slipped beneath her door, along with the attacker in the alley before her selection, proved that dangerous forces were already circling, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 3 days after her conversation with Kale, Elena stood in the residence's private training courtyard, watching Silas Bren pace slowly before her, his weathered face creased with concentration. Kale had insisted she learn to understand and control whatever abilities were awakening within her, and Silas, despite his age, remained one of the few people within the residence who possessed genuine knowledge of Silverkin abilities from decades past. "Close your eyes," Silas instructed gently. "Focus on the warmth you described feeling in your palms. Do not fight it this time. Allow it to surface naturally." Elena closed her eyes, her breathing slow and deliberate, though nervous energy still hummed beneath her calm exterior. Slowly, she felt the familiar warmth building within her hands, spreading gradually up through her wrists and forearms. "Good," Silas murmured. "Now, open your eyes and look at your hands." Elena obeyed, and this time, rather than panicking at the sight of the faint silvery glow emanating from her fingertips, she forced herself to remain calm, observing the phenomenon with careful curiosity instead of fear. "This is remarkable," Silas said, genuine wonder coloring his voice. "I have read accounts of Silverkin abilities in old texts, but I never imagined I would witness one myself. Your control is improving already, simply through calm observation. What exactly can this ability do?" Elena asked, extending her glowing hand slightly, studying the soft light with growing fascination rather than dread. "Historical texts suggest Silverkin abilities were tied closely to lunar energy," Silas explained. "Some accounts describe healing properties. Others describe more defensive capabilities, protective barriers, heightened senses during moonlit hours. The full range of abilities likely varied between individuals, much like how different alphas or omegas might express slightly different physical characteristics despite shared heritage." Elena flexed her fingers slowly, watching the glow shift and pulse in response to her concentration. "Do you think I could learn to control this fully? Enough that it no longer poses a danger to me?" "With practice, likely yes," Silas said. "Though I suspect stronger emotions, particularly fear or distress, will continue triggering involuntary displays until your control strengthens considerably. I would recommend practicing regularly, ideally away from prying eyes until you feel more confident." Elena nodded, grateful for his patient guidance, though the reminder of prying eyes brought her thoughts immediately back to the threatening note still hidden within her traveling bag. Someone within the residence already suspected, perhaps already knew, exactly what she was becoming. Their training session continued for another hour, Elena gradually learning to summon and dismiss the silvery glow at will, though larger displays of ability remained frustratingly beyond her current control. By the time they finished, exhaustion weighed heavily on her limbs, though a small, cautious sense of pride accompanied it as well. As she made her way back toward her private quarters, Elena noticed Mira Kessler standing near the entrance to the eastern corridor, watching her approach with an expression far too calculated to be simple curiosity. "You have been spending considerable time with the residence healer," Mira observed as Elena drew closer. "I wonder what could possibly require such extensive private instruction." "Personal matters," Elena said carefully, keeping her expression neutral despite the unease coiling in her stomach. "Of course," Mira said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Though I confess I find myself increasingly curious about you, Elena Voss. The Moon Heir's sudden fascination, your mysterious lack of family records, and now these private sessions with Silas Bren. It paints quite an intriguing picture, does it not?" "I do not know what picture you believe you are painting," Elena said, forcing calm into her voice despite the mounting dread building within her chest. Mira stepped closer, lowering her voice slightly. "I have my own sources of information, Elena. Sources that suggest your bloodline may not be quite as ordinary as the Council's incomplete records would have everyone believe." Elena's blood ran cold. "I do not understand what you are implying." "I think you understand perfectly well," Mira said softly. "And I think certain members of this council would find such information extraordinarily valuable, should it ever come to light." "Are you threatening me?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper despite the anger now mixing with her fear. "I am simply making an observation," Mira said, her expression carefully neutral, "though I suppose it depends entirely on how you choose to respond. Perhaps we could discuss an arrangement, one that benefits us both, rather than allowing this situation to escalate into something neither of us can control." "What kind of arrangement?" Elena asked warily. Mira's smile sharpened slightly. Convince the Moon Heir to reconsider his choice. Step aside gracefully. Allow someone more suitable, myself for instance, to take your place as his companion. Do this quietly, without drawing further attention, and your secrets remain safely buried. Refuse, and I cannot guarantee what information might accidentally find its way to certain council members who would be most interested in learning it. Elena stared at Mira, disbelief and fury warring within her chest. You would use blackmail to secure a position you believe you deserve. I would use whatever tools are available to me, Mira said simply. Just as I suspect you have used whatever tools were available to you, in order to survive this long, while hiding whatever truth you carry. Elena wanted desperately to deny it, to defend herself against the accusation, but the truth of Mira's words settled uncomfortably close to reality. She had indeed used every available tool to survive, hiding, lying, disappearing whenever necessary. She could hardly condemn Mira for attempting something similar, even as anger burned through her at the injustice of the situation. I need time to consider your proposal, Elena said finally, buying herself space to think clearly rather than reacting rashly in the heat of the moment. Do not take too long, Mira warned, already turning to leave. Patience is not a virtue I possess in abundance, particularly when my future happiness depends on the outcome. Elena watched her disappear down the corridor, her mind racing through the implications of this new threat. If Mira truly possessed information about her bloodline, information potentially damning enough to expose her to the council, then the danger surrounding her had multiplied considerably. It was no longer simply the mysterious attacker from the alley, or an anonymous threatening note. Now, someone within the residence itself held knowledge capable of ending her life, and was willing to use it as leverage for personal gain. She needed to speak with Kale immediately, though the thought of adding yet another burden to their already complicated situation filled her with reluctance. Still, keeping secrets from him now, after everything they had already shared, felt increasingly wrong, particularly when Mira's threat directly endangered both their futures. She found Kale in his private study later that evening, reviewing documents by candlelight, his expression tightening with concern the moment he noticed her troubled demeanor. What happened? He asked immediately, setting aside his papers. Elena recounted her conversation with Mira carefully, watching Kale's expression shift from concern to controlled anger as she spoke. She would use such information to manipulate her way into a position of power, Kale said once Elena finished, his voice tight with restrained fury. This cannot continue unchecked. What do you propose we do? Elena asked. If I refuse her demands, she may expose me to the council. If I comply, I hand her exactly the position of influence she desires, based entirely on blackmail rather than any genuine merit. Kale considered this carefully, his sharp mind clearly working through possible solutions. Perhaps it is time we address the truth directly, on our own terms, rather than allowing others to control the narrative through threats and manipulation. Elena's breath caught. You mean revealing my identity to the council voluntarily? Not entirely, Kale clarified, but perhaps beginning with those council members I believe would respond with reason rather than immediate hostility. Building support before Corwin Hale or others hostile to the Silverkin bloodline learn the truth through less controlled circumstances. That is an enormous risk, Elena said, fear tightening her chest at the very thought. It is, Kale agreed, but continuing to allow blackmail and threats to dictate our actions carries risks of its own, risks we cannot fully predict or control. At least this way, we choose the timing and manner of the revelation, rather than leaving it entirely in Mira's or anyone else's hands. Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the terrifying uncertainty of controlled disclosure against the equally terrifying uncertainty of continued secrecy under threat. Neither option offered true safety, but perhaps, as Kale suggested, choosing their own path forward offered at least some measure of control over an increasingly dangerous situation. If we do this, Elena said slowly, we must move carefully. And quickly, before Mira or anyone else takes matters into their own hands. Agreed, Kale said, his storm-colored eyes meeting hers with quiet, unwavering determination. We will face this together, exactly as I promised. Neither of them could have anticipated how quickly circumstances would spiral beyond their control, nor how soon their carefully considered plans would be forced into motion by forces far more dangerous than either had yet encountered. The garden had become Elena's favorite place within the residence, a small pocket of peace amid the constant tension of council politics and hidden threats. Late one evening, she found Kale waiting for her near the same fountain where her abilities had first surfaced weeks earlier, moonlight casting silver patterns across the surrounding stone pathways. I wanted to speak with you privately, Kale said as she approached, away from watching eyes and listening ears. Is something wrong? Elena asked, immediately alert to the seriousness in his tone. Not wrong exactly, Kale said, though hesitation colored his voice in a way Elena had rarely witnessed from him. I have been thinking about us, about this bond growing between us, and I find myself wanting to understand it more fully. Elena's heart quickened, though whether from nervousness or anticipation, she could not clearly distinguish. What do you mean? Since the moment I first saw you, Kale said slowly, I have felt drawn to you in ways I cannot fully rationalize through logic alone. I initially believed it was simple curiosity, or perhaps some lingering instinct connected to your Silverkin heritage. But the longer we spend together, the more I realize it runs far deeper than mere curiosity. Elena remained silent, uncertain how to respond, though her own heart echoed a similar sentiment she had been too afraid to fully acknowledge, even to herself. I care for you, Elena, Kale continued, his storm-colored eyes holding hers steadily in the moonlight. Beyond politics, beyond bloodlines, beyond whatever expectations the council or my own position demands of me, I care for you as the woman standing before me now. Elena felt tears prick unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had spent years carefully suppressing alongside her Silverkin heritage. I have spent my entire life believing myself unworthy of such feelings, she admitted softly. Rejected, defective, unwanted. It becomes difficult to believe otherwise, even when someone as remarkable as you suggests differently. You are none of those things, Kale said firmly, closing the remaining distance between them. You are strong, resilient, and carry burdens most people could never imagine bearing with such grace. I consider myself fortunate that whatever force guided my choice during the selection ceremony led me directly to you. Elena allowed herself, for the first time since arriving at the residence, to fully embrace the warmth blooming within her chest, unguarded by fear or careful calculation. I care for you as well, Kale, more than I ever expected to, given the circumstances that brought us together. Kale reached out gently, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his touch soft and reverent. Whatever challenges lie ahead, Elena, know that my feelings toward you remain unwavering. Bloodline, politics, ancient conflicts, none of it changes what exists between us now. As their lips met beneath the moonlit sky, Elena felt something shift powerfully within her, a warmth spreading not only through her heart, but through her entire body, culminating in her palms once again glowing with soft, silvery light. This time, rather than fear, only quiet wonder accompanied the sensation, as though her very abilities responded naturally to the deepening bond between them. Kale pulled back slightly, studying the gentle glow surrounding her hands with fascination rather than alarm. Remarkable, he murmured. It seems our connection influences your abilities in ways neither of us anticipated. Silas mentioned strong emotions might trigger involuntary displays, Elena said, slightly breathless. Though I confess, this feels far less alarming than previous occurrences. Perhaps because this particular emotion brings you genuine joy rather than fear, Kale suggested gently. They remained together in the garden for hours, discussing hopes and fears neither had previously voiced aloud, building a foundation of trust that felt increasingly essential given the mounting dangers surrounding them. Elena shared fragmented memories that had resurfaced since her suppression began weakening, memories of her mother's gentle voice, warnings about hiding her true nature, glimpses of a childhood spent constantly moving from place to place to avoid detection. Kale, in turn, shared his own burdens, the weight of leadership expectations placed upon him since childhood, the isolation that came with being heir to such significant power, and his own complicated feelings regarding his family's role in the Silverkin purge decades earlier. I cannot undo what my grandfather did, Kale said quietly, staring out across the moonlit garden, but I refuse to allow that same violence and fear to dictate how I treat you, or how I lead this territory moving forward. Your grandfather's actions were not your own, Elena said gently. Though I understand the weight of carrying inherited guilt, I have spent years feeling responsible for a bloodline conflict I never asked to be part of. Perhaps, Kale said, turning to face her fully, we can work together to build something better than what came before us. A future where Silverkin and Moon lineage exist not as enemies but as allies, or perhaps something even closer. Elena's breath caught at the implication behind his words, though she said nothing, allowing the moment to settle comfortably between them rather than pressing for clarity she was not yet certain either of them was ready to provide. Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed within the residence, Servants whispered about the Moon Heir's obvious affection for his companion, while council members watched with varying degrees of approval and suspicion. Corwin Hale, in particular, observed the developing relationship with a coldness that unsettled Elena whenever their paths crossed during formal gatherings. "You seem to have secured quite a hold over our future leader," Corwin remarked one afternoon, cornering Elena briefly in a quiet hallway. His pale eyes studied her with calculating precision that reminded her uncomfortably of a predator assessing potential prey. "I have done nothing beyond being myself," Elena replied carefully, refusing to allow his intimidation tactics to visibly rattle her composure. "Yourself," Corwin repeated slowly, a thin smile curving his lips. "I wonder precisely who that self truly is, given how remarkably little verified information exists regarding your background." Elena's pulse quickened, though she maintained careful composure. "I fail to see why my background concerns you so deeply, Elder Hale." "Everything regarding the Moon Heir's companion concerns this council," Corwin said, his voice hardening slightly. "Particularly when certain resemblances suggest connections to bloodlines this council worked very hard to eliminate generations ago." Elena's heart hammered painfully against her ribs, though she forced herself to maintain steady eye contact rather than betraying the fear coursing through her veins. "I am uncertain what resemblances you believe you have observed, Elder Hale." "Perhaps nothing at all," Corwin said, though his tone suggested he believed quite the opposite. "Or perhaps everything. Rest assured, Elena Voss, I intend to discover the truth eventually, regardless of how carefully it remains hidden." He departed without waiting for her response, leaving Elena standing alone in the hallway, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking as fear flooded through her unchecked. Corwin Hale, the very council member Cale had warned her about, clearly already harbored serious suspicions regarding her true identity. That evening, Elena relayed the unsettling encounter to Cale, watching his expression darken with barely controlled anger, as she described Corwin's veiled threats. "He is testing you," Cale said, pacing his study with restless energy, attempting to provoke a reaction that might confirm his suspicions without requiring concrete proof. "What happens if he gathers enough evidence to bring formal accusations before the council?" Elena asked, unable to fully suppress the tremor in her voice. Cale's expression grew grim. "Then we will be forced to confront this situation far sooner than we originally intended, on terms far less favorable than the careful disclosure we had planned." Elena wrapped her arms around herself, chilled despite the warm evening air surrounding them. "I do not know how much longer I can maintain this secret, Cale. Between Mira's blackmail, Corwin's suspicions, and my own abilities growing increasingly difficult to control, it feels as though everything is converging toward an inevitable collision." Cale crossed the room, gently taking her hands into his own, steadying her trembling with quiet strength. "Whatever collision comes, Elena, we will face it together. I promised you that from the very beginning, and I intend to honor that promise regardless of what challenges lie ahead." Elena wanted desperately to believe his reassurances, though the mounting threats surrounding them made genuine peace of mind increasingly difficult to sustain. Somewhere within the residence, dangerous forces continued gathering, secrets threatening to surface at the worst possible moment, and time, she feared, was rapidly running out. The summons arrived without warning, delivered by a stern-faced council attendant just after dawn. Elena was to appear before the full Lunar Council within the hour, no explanation provided beyond the formal request for her presence. Elena's hands trembled as she dressed quickly, her mind racing through every possible reason for such an unexpected summons. None of the possibilities she considered brought any comfort. She found Cale already awake, pacing anxiously outside her chambers, his expression tight with barely restrained concern. "They summoned you as well?" she asked, though his presence already answered the question. "Corwin Hale requested an emergency session," Cale confirmed, his jaw clenched tightly. "He would not provide further details, though I fear the timing cannot be coincidental." Elena's stomach twisted painfully. "Do you believe he has gathered enough evidence to formally accuse me?" "I do not know," Cale admitted, "but whatever happens within that chamber, remember that I stand beside you, regardless of what accusations are made." They walked together toward the council hall, Elena's legs feeling increasingly unsteady with each step. The grand chamber, when they entered, was already filled with council members seated in a wide semicircle, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Corwin Hale stood at the center, his pale eyes gleaming with barely concealed triumph, as Elena and Cale took their positions before the assembled council. "Thank you for joining us so promptly," Corwin began, his voice carrying easily through the silent chamber. I called this emergency session because I believe this council faces a matter of grave importance, one that threatens the very stability of our territory. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members, curiosity and concern evident on their faces. Several weeks ago, Corwin continued, our moon heir selected a companion under circumstances many of us found unusual. An Omega with remarkably incomplete family records, chosen despite dozens of more suitable candidates presenting themselves during the ceremony. Elena felt every eye in the chamber shift toward her, judgment and suspicion radiating from the assembled council members. I have conducted my own investigation into this matter, Corwin continued, producing a folder of documents from beneath his robes, and I believe I have uncovered evidence suggesting our moon heir's chosen companion carries bloodline heritage this council specifically eliminated 3 decades ago, during what has since become known as the Silverkin Purge. Gasps echoed throughout the chamber, council members exchanging alarmed glances as Corwin's accusation settled heavily into the tense atmosphere. This is a serious accusation, Elder Hale, one of the seated council members said carefully. Do you possess concrete proof to support such a claim? I possess a portrait, Corwin said, bearing striking resemblance between Elena Voss and a known Silverkin bloodline member named Dara Voss, eliminated during the Purge 30 years ago. I also possess witness testimony describing unusual abilities displayed by Elena Voss within these very walls, abilities historically associated exclusively with Silverkin heritage. Elena's blood ran cold. Someone had witnessed her training sessions with Silas, or perhaps the moment her abilities surfaced during her private moment with Kale in the garden. Either way, Corwin possessed exactly the confirmation he needed to solidify his accusations. These are serious claims, Kale said, stepping forward before anyone else could respond. But circumstantial resemblance and vague reports of unusual abilities hardly constitute definitive proof of Silverkin heritage. Perhaps the accused herself might clarify the matter, Corwin said, his gaze shifting directly toward Elena with predatory satisfaction. Elena Voss, do you deny carrying Silverkin bloodline heritage? The chamber fell utterly silent, every council member awaiting her response with rapt attention. Elena felt Kale's hand find hers briefly beneath the cover of her sleeve, a small gesture of support and solidarity that gave her just enough courage to speak. I did not choose my bloodline, Elena said slowly, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to maintain composure. I did not choose to be born carrying heritage. This council decided to eliminate 30 years ago. I have spent my entire life hiding, running, suppressing abilities I barely understand myself, simply to survive. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber at her open acknowledgement, though whether from shock at her honesty or confirmation of Corwin's accusations, Elena could not determine. Then you confirm you are indeed Silverkin, Corwin said, satisfaction evident in his voice. I confirm I am the daughter of Dara Voss, Elena said, drawing strength from some place deep within herself she had not previously known existed. But I also confirm that I have never once used my heritage to threaten this territory, this council, or anyone within it. I have lived quietly, hidden, harming no one, simply attempting to survive circumstances I never chose. Regardless of your intentions, Corwin said sharply, Silverkin heritage represents a fundamental threat to the stability of the Moon lineage's authority. History has proven this repeatedly. This council cannot allow such a threat to remain within our walls, let alone standing beside our future leader. With respect, Elder Hale, Kale interjected, his voice carrying firm authority despite the tension of the moment. History has proven that fear and violence, rather than genuine threat, drove the decisions made 30 years ago. Elena has done nothing to warrant the same treatment her mother received. Her very existence is the threat, Corwin snapped, his composure finally cracking slightly. The Silverkin bloodline was eliminated for good reason. Allowing it to survive, let alone flourish beside our future leader, invites exactly the kind of conflict this council worked so hard to prevent. Or perhaps, Kale said, his voice growing stronger, it invites the opportunity to correct a grave injustice committed against innocent people who posed no genuine threat beyond simply existing differently than expected. The chamber erupted into heated debate, council members arguing amongst themselves as Elena stood frozen at the center of the storm she had always feared would eventually arrive. She glanced toward Kale, finding steady reassurance in his unwavering gaze, though the outcome of this council session remained desperately uncertain. Silence, Corwin demanded, raising his voice above the chaos. This matter requires immediate resolution. I propose formal exile for Elena Voss, effective immediately. removing this threat from our territory before it has opportunity to cause further complications. I object, Kale said firmly, stepping directly in front of Elena as though physically shielding her from the accusation. Elena Voss remains my chosen companion, selected through proper ceremony witnessed by this entire council. Exiling her without concrete evidence of any actual wrongdoing sets a dangerous precedent, one that punishes heritage rather than genuine action. The Moon Heir's personal feelings cannot override this council's responsibility to protect our territory, Corwin argued. Then let this council vote, Kale said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the tension crackling through the chamber. Formally, properly, weighing actual evidence of wrongdoing against baseless fear rooted in decades-old prejudice. A tense silence followed his words as council members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly divided on how to proceed. Finally, an elderly council member near the back of the chamber spoke up, his voice carrying quiet authority earned through decades of service. I propose we delay formal judgment, he said carefully. Allow time for proper investigation into whether Elena Voss has committed any actual harm, rather than rushing toward exile based solely on heritage and unverified rumors. Murmurs of agreement followed his suggestion, though Corwin's expression darkened considerably at the delay. Very well, Corwin said finally, though barely concealed fury colored his voice. This council will reconvene in 1 week's time to render final judgment. Until then, Elena Voss will remain under careful observation, confined to the residence grounds pending further investigation. The session ended abruptly, council members filing out amid hushed, urgent conversations. Elena remained standing frozen at the center of the chamber, overwhelmed by the sudden weight of everything that had just transpired. We have 1 week, Kale said quietly once the chamber had emptied, turning to face her with grim determination. 1 week to build enough support among the council to prevent Corwin from securing your exile, or worse. And if we fail? Elena asked, fear evident in her trembling voice. Kale's expression remained resolute, though worry shadowed his storm-colored eyes. We will not fail, Elena. I refuse to allow it. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, both of them understood the terrifying uncertainty of what lay ahead. 1 week that would determine not only Elena's fate, but potentially the future of both their bloodlines entirely. The week following the emergency council session passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Kale spent long hours meeting privately with individual council members, carefully building support for Elena's continued place within the residence, while Elena herself remained confined largely to the residence grounds, watched closely by guards stationed at every exit. Despite the mounting pressure, Elena found herself increasingly determined rather than defeated. She spent hours training with Silas, gradually learning better control over her abilities, discovering that focused practice allowed her to summon and dismiss the silvery glow with far greater precision than she had initially believed possible. Your progress is remarkable, Silas observed during one particularly intense session, watching Elena successfully create a small, controlled barrier of shimmering silver light around herself, holding it steady for several long moments before allowing it to fade naturally. Few Silverkin descendants I have read about achieved such control within such a brief training period. I have considerable motivation, Elena said, slightly breathless from the effort. If I cannot demonstrate genuine control over these abilities, Corwin will use every uncontrolled display as further evidence against me. Perhaps, Silas said thoughtfully, your abilities could serve as evidence in your favor, rather than against you. If you demonstrated controlled, purposeful use of your heritage, rather than the chaotic bursts Corwin describes, it might help sway hesitant council members toward viewing your abilities as an asset rather than a threat. Elena considered this possibility carefully. Do you believe I could demonstrate such control before the council reconvenes? With continued practice, Silas said, I believe it entirely possible. Meanwhile, Ivy visited frequently, smuggling small comforts past the watchful guards, and providing much-needed emotional support during Elena's increasingly stressful confinement. The entire territory is talking about nothing else, Ivy reported during one visit, settling into the small sitting room where Elena now spent most of her restricted days. Some believe Corwin is right to fear Silverkin heritage. Others believe the Moon Heir's obvious devotion to you proves your character speaks louder than old prejudices. And what do you believe? Elena asked. I believe you are the same person you have always been, Ivy said firmly. Silverkin blood or not, you have never harmed anyone. You have only ever tried to survive and build a quiet, peaceful life. That should matter more than ancient conflicts neither of us fully understand. Elena squeezed her friend's hand gratefully, though worry continued gnawing at her despite the support surrounding her. Mira's earlier blackmail attempt had seemingly faded into irrelevance given the far larger threat now facing Elena, though she could not shake the suspicion that Mira herself might have been the one who reported her abilities to Corwin in the first place. Confirmation of this suspicion arrived unexpectedly 3 days before the council's scheduled reconvening. Elena encountered Mira during a rare permitted walk through the residence's inner courtyard, guards trailing at a respectful distance. "I suppose you believe I orchestrated your current predicament," Mira said without preamble, falling into step beside Elena despite the guard's watchful presence. "The thought had occurred to me," Elena admitted honestly. "You give me too much credit," Mira said, a hint of genuine bitterness coloring her voice. "I threatened you, yes, hoping to secure my own position through your withdrawal. But reporting your abilities directly to Corwin Hale was never part of my intentions. I wanted leverage, not your complete destruction." "Then who reported me?" Elena asked, genuinely curious despite her lingering distrust. "I do not know for certain," Mira said, "though I suspect one of the household servants, perhaps bribed or coerced into watching you more closely than we realized. Corwin has resources and influence throughout this residence that most of us underestimate." Elena studied Mira carefully, searching for deception in her expression, finding instead something that looked remarkably like genuine regret. "Why tell me this now?" Mira's expression hardened slightly, though something vulnerable flickered briefly beneath her composed exterior. "Because regardless of my own selfish ambitions, I never wished exile or worse upon you, Elena. And because Corwin's hatred toward the Silverkin runs far deeper and darker than simple political convenience. If he succeeds in exiling you, I fear it will not end there. He seeks to eliminate every trace of Silverkin heritage from this territory, permanently." A chill spread through Elena's body at Mira's warning. "What do you mean, eliminate permanently?" "I have overheard conversations," Mira said, lowering her voice further, glancing nervously at the trailing guards. "Corwin does not merely wish for your exile. He has been quietly gathering support for something far more severe, should exile prove insufficient to satisfy the council's fears." "Are you suggesting he intends to have me killed?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am suggesting," Mira said carefully, "that you should prepare for every possibility, regardless of how the official council vote proceeds next week." Elena thanked Mira for the warning, despite their complicated history, and hurried immediately to share this troubling information with Cale. She found him deep in discussion with Edwin Marsh within his private study, both men's expressions grave as she relayed Mira's warning. "This confirms my own suspicions," Edwin said once Elena finished speaking. "I have heard whispers among certain council factions, discussions of contingency plans, should the formal vote fail to secure exile. Corwin has powerful allies who share his views regarding Silverkin heritage." "Then we must ensure the vote succeeds decisively in Elena's favor," Cale said firmly. "Enough to eliminate any justification for further extreme action." "How close are we to securing sufficient support?" Elena asked. Edwin considered carefully before answering. "Closer than I initially anticipated, though not yet certain. Several previously hesitant council members have expressed genuine reconsideration after witnessing your composure during the initial hearing, and hearing testimonies regarding your character from those who know you personally." "What more can we do before the vote?" Elena asked, desperate determination replacing the fear that had previously threatened to overwhelm her. Cale and Edwin exchanged a thoughtful glance before Cale spoke. "Perhaps it is time you addressed the full council directly, Elena. Not simply answering accusations, but presenting your own case, your own history, in your own words. Allow them to see you as a person, rather than simply a symbol representing old fears." Elena's stomach tightened at the suggestion, though she recognized the wisdom behind it. "I have spent my entire life hiding from exactly this kind of exposure. Standing before the full council, sharing my history voluntarily, terrifies me more than I can properly express." "I understand," Cale said gently, taking her hands into his own. "But sometimes, the very thing we fear most becomes the path toward genuine safety and acceptance." Elena considered his words carefully, weighing her deep instinctive fear of exposure against the mounting danger of continued secrecy and misunderstanding. Finally, she nodded slowly, drawing strength from Cale's steady presence beside her. "Very well," she said, her voice growing steadier with newfound resolve. "I will speak before the council when they reconvene. I will share my history, my fears, and my hopes, openly and honestly. Whatever judgment follows, at least it will be based on truth, rather than assumptions and old prejudice." Cale's expression softened with evident pride and relief. "Whatever the council decides, Elena, Know that speaking your truth openly takes far greater courage than continuing to hide ever did. As the final days before the council's reconvening slipped steadily away, Elena spent every available moment preparing herself, practicing both her growing control over her abilities and the difficult words she intended to share before the assembled council. Whatever happened next, she intended to face it not as a frightened hidden secret, but as herself, fully and unapologetically, for the first time in her entire life. The council chamber felt even more imposing on the day of Elena's return, sunlight streaming through tall windows to illuminate the assembled faces watching her enter, with Kale steady beside her. Every seat was filled, and additional observers lined the back walls, drawn by weeks of spreading rumors about the unprecedented situation unfolding within their territory. Corwin Hale stood ready near the center of the chamber, his expression carrying the same cold satisfaction he had displayed during the initial hearing. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze steadily as she took her position before the assembled council, refusing to allow his obvious confidence to shake her carefully prepared resolve. This council reconvenes to render final judgment regarding Elena Voss, the presiding elder announced, his voice carrying solemnly through the silent chamber. Elder Hale, you may proceed with your final arguments. Corwin stepped forward confidently, addressing the council with practiced authority. This council has had 1 week to consider the evidence before us. Elena Voss has confirmed her Silverkin heritage openly. She has demonstrated abilities historically associated with a bloodline this council eliminated, specifically because of the danger such abilities pose to our territory's stability. I see no reason for further delay. I urge immediate exile, effective today. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as Corwin took his seat, clearly confident in the strength of his argument. The presiding elder turned toward Elena, his expression carefully neutral. Elena Voss, you requested opportunity to address this council directly. You may proceed. Elena stepped forward, her heart pounding fiercely despite the calm exterior she fought to maintain. She glanced briefly toward Kale, finding steady encouragement in his gaze, before turning to address the full assembly of council members watching her, with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and quiet sympathy. I did not choose to be born Silverkin, Elena began, her voice trembling slightly before steadying with each passing sentence. Just as none of you chose the bloodlines you carry, I spent my entire childhood moving from place to place, watching my mother sacrifice everything to keep me hidden and safe, though I never fully understood why until very recently. She paused, gathering courage before continuing. I grew up believing myself rejected, defective, unworthy of the life other Omegas around me seemed to enjoy so easily. I never understood that this rejection, this invisibility I resented for so long, was actually my mother's desperate attempt to protect me from exactly this moment, this council, this judgment I now stand before. Several council members shifted uncomfortably, clearly moved by her words despite themselves. I have never used my heritage to harm anyone, Elena continued, her voice growing steadily stronger. I have lived quietly, working honestly, hurting no one, asking nothing beyond simple survival. When the Moon Heir selected me during the ceremony, I never sought that honor. I feared it, precisely because I knew it risked exposing exactly the truth we now stand here discussing. She turned slightly, addressing Corwin directly. Elder Hale speaks of danger, of instability, based entirely on events that occurred 30 years ago, events I had no part in, born from a conflict I know only through fragmented memories and second-hand history. I ask this council, respectfully, to judge me based on my own actions, my own character, rather than fears rooted in decades-old prejudice against a bloodline that no longer poses any organized threat. To demonstrate her point, Elena extended her hands slowly before the assembled council, allowing her silvery abilities to surface, not chaotically or fearfully as previous reports had suggested, but calm, controlled, and deliberate. A soft, shimmering light spread gracefully across her palms, coalescing gently into a small, protective barrier that hovered peacefully in the air before her, entirely under her command. Gasps echoed through the chamber, though this time, wonder, rather than fear, colored many of the observers' expressions. This is what Silverkin heritage truly represents, Elena said softly, allowing the display to continue for several long moments before gently dismissing it. Not chaos, not danger, but simply a different kind of strength, one that can serve this territory just as faithfully as any other bloodline, if given the chance, rather than fear and rejection. Silence held the chamber for several long moments following her demonstration, council members exchanging thoughtful, uncertain glances. A convincing performance, Corwin said finally, rising from his seat with visible frustration coloring his composed exterior. But performance alone cannot erase 30 years of justified precaution. This council eliminated the Silverkin bloodline for legitimate reasons, reasons that remain valid regardless of one individual's carefully rehearsed demonstration. Then perhaps, Cale said, stepping forward to stand directly beside Elena, this council should reconsider whether those reasons were ever truly legitimate, rather than simply born from fear and political convenience during a particularly turbulent period in our history. You speak with obvious bias, given your personal attachment to the accused, Corwin snapped, his composure finally cracking under mounting pressure. I speak as your future leader, Cale replied, his voice carrying absolute authority that silenced the murmuring chamber immediately. And I tell you plainly, Elder Hale, that continuing to punish innocent people for the actions and fears of previous generations serves no genuine purpose beyond perpetuating cycles of violence and injustice that this territory desperately needs to move beyond. The presiding elder raised his hand, calling for order as the chamber threatened to erupt into heated debate once again. This council will now proceed to formal vote. Those in favor of Elena Voss's immediate exile, please indicate accordingly. A tense silence followed as council members considered their decision carefully. Slowly, hands began rising throughout the chamber, though notably fewer than Corwin had clearly anticipated, based on his confident expression faltering slightly as the count proceeded. Those opposed to exile, favoring continued residence pending further observation, the presiding elder continued, once the first count concluded. More hands rose this time, a clear majority forming throughout the assembled council members. Elena held her breath, watching the count proceed with agonizing slowness, until finally the presiding elder turned back toward the chamber with visible relief evident in his expression. The council has reached its decision, he announced formally. By clear majority, this council rejects the proposal for Elena Voss's exile. She shall remain within this territory, under continued observation, though free to pursue her role as the Moon Heir's chosen companion, without further formal restriction. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that her legs nearly buckled beneath her, though Cale's steady arm caught her immediately, supporting her through the overwhelming wave of emotion crashing over her. Corwin's expression darkened considerably at the announcement, though he said nothing further, merely turning and departing the chamber with barely restrained fury evident in his stiff, angry movements. It is not truly over, Edwin Marsh murmured quietly to Cale and Elena, as the chamber began emptying around them. Corwin will not accept this defeat gracefully. Be watchful, both of you, in the days ahead. Elena nodded gratefully despite her exhaustion, understanding fully that today's victory, however significant, likely represented only a temporary reprieve, rather than a permanent resolution to the dangers still surrounding her. But for now, standing beside Cale amid the slowly emptying chamber, she allowed herself a small, genuine moment of hope. The first true hope she had experienced since her identity's dangerous unraveling had begun weeks earlier. We did it, she whispered, tears finally escaping despite her best efforts to contain them. You did it, Cale corrected gently, pulling her into a warm, protective embrace. Your courage today changed hearts and minds that fear alone could never have reached. Whatever challenges remained ahead, Elena finally believed, for the first time in her entire life, that she might actually possess the strength necessary to face them, not alone, hidden and afraid, but openly, supported, and unashamed of the truth she carried within her. 3 nights after the council's decision, Elena woke suddenly to the sound of her chamber door being forced open, shadows moving quickly through the darkness before she could fully gather her senses. Strong hands seized her before she could cry out, a rough cloth pressed firmly against her mouth to muffle any sound. Corwin sends his regards, a low voice growled near her ear, and Elena immediately recognized the same voice that had threatened her in the alley weeks earlier, before the selection ceremony had ever taken place. The council may have spared you today, but they cannot protect you from what happens in the shadows, where no formal vote holds any power. Panic surged through Elena, though years of careful survival instincts refused to allow her to freeze entirely. She focused desperately on the warmth building within her hands, the very abilities she had spent weeks learning to control, now her only remaining defense against whatever fate Corwin intended for her. The silvery glow surged powerfully from her palms, brighter and more forceful than any previous display, startling her attacker enough that his grip loosened momentarily. Elena wrenched herself free, stumbling backward as she summoned every ounce of control Silas had taught her, forming a protective barrier of shimmering light between herself and the 2 masked figures now revealed standing within her chamber. Guards! She screamed, her voice finally breaking free from the cloth that had briefly muffled her. The masked figures lunged forward, attempting to breach her hastily formed barrier, but Elena held firm, drawing on reserves of strength and determination she never knew she possessed. The barrier flared brighter, pushing back against their attempts, buying precious seconds until the chamber door burst open again, this time revealing Kale and several residence guards rushing to her defense. The ensuing struggle was brief but intense, Kale's guards quickly overwhelming the two attackers despite their initial surprise advantage. Within moments, both masked figures lay subdued upon the chamber floor, their identities revealed as low-ranking guards secretly loyal to Corwin's faction within the council. "Elena," Kale said urgently, rushing to her side the moment the immediate danger passed. "Are you injured?" "I am unharmed," Elena managed, though her entire body trembled violently with the aftermath of adrenaline and fear. "Your abilities protected me, Kale. Without them, I fear what might have happened tonight." Kale pulled her tightly against him, relief evident in every line of his tense body. "This ends now," he said firmly, anger blazing fiercely in his storm-colored eyes as he turned to address the guards restraining the captured attackers. "Bring them before the full council immediately. I want Corwin Hale's involvement in this attack exposed publicly, before every member present." Within hours, an emergency session convened once again, this time under vastly different circumstances than the previous formal hearings. The captured attackers, faced with undeniable evidence of their attempted assault, confessed readily to acting under Corwin Hale's direct orders, revealing a carefully coordinated plan to eliminate Elena entirely, should the formal council vote fail to secure her exile. Corwin's face paled dramatically as the confessions were read aloud before the assembled council, his previous confidence crumbling entirely beneath the weight of undeniable evidence against him. "This is an outrage," Corwin attempted weakly, though his protests carried little conviction against the damning testimony now exposed before his peers. "The outrage," Kale said, his voice carrying cold, controlled fury throughout the silent chamber, "is that you attempted to circumvent this council's legitimate decision through violence and murder, Elder Hale. Your actions tonight prove definitively that your objections to Elena Voss were never truly about protecting this territory, but rather about satisfying personal vendettas, rooted in decades-old grievances you were never able to move beyond." The council's judgment came swiftly and decisively this time. Corwin Hale stripped immediately of his position and authority, formally exiled from the territory he had once wielded such considerable influence within. As guards escorted him from the chamber, his expression carried none of the earlier confidence, replaced instead by bitter defeat and quiet, simmering resentment. With Corwin's threat finally eliminated, the residents settled gradually into a new, more peaceful rhythm over the following weeks. Elena's abilities continued strengthening under Silas's careful guidance, until she could summon and control her Silverkin heritage with confidence and precision that would have seemed impossible mere months earlier. Mira Kessler, surprisingly, became something of an unexpected ally in the aftermath, her earlier blackmail attempts fading into distant memory, as she instead offered genuine friendship, perhaps recognizing in Elena's journey something of her own struggles within the rigid expectations placed upon Omegas throughout the territory. "I owe you an apology," Mira said one afternoon, finding Elena in the residence gardens where their earlier confrontation had once taken place. "My earlier actions were driven by ambition and fear, rather than any genuine understanding of who you truly are." "We have both learned difficult lessons these past months," Elena replied gently, offering forgiveness she genuinely felt rather than simply performed for propriety's sake. "Perhaps we can move forward as something closer to friends, rather than rivals." Ivy, delighted by this development, quickly folded Mira into their small, close circle, the three young women finding unexpected camaraderie despite their vastly different backgrounds and earlier tensions. As weeks turned into months, Elena's bond with Kale deepened steadily, built upon a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership rather than mere political convenience. The council, having witnessed Elena's courage and integrity throughout the entire ordeal, gradually shifted from suspicion toward genuine acceptance, several members even expressing interest in learning more about Silverkin heritage, viewing it now as a potential asset rather than an inherited threat. On a bright morning several months after Corwin's exile, Kale called for a formal gathering within the same council chamber that had once threatened Elena's very existence. This time, however, the atmosphere carried celebration rather than tension. The entire territory's leadership assembled to witness an announcement Kale had carefully prepared. "Many of you remember the uncertainty surrounding my selection during the companion ceremony months ago," Kale began, addressing the assembled crowd with quiet confidence. Some of you questioned my judgment, doubted my choice, and feared what her heritage might mean for our territory's future. He turned, extending his hand toward Elena, who stepped forward gracefully to stand beside him, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, fully embracing the truth of who she was before the entire assembled leadership of the territory. Elena Voss is not merely my companion, Kale continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. She is Silverkin, descended from a bloodline this territory once feared, and eliminated out of misguided prejudice. She is also the bravest, most resilient person I have ever known, and I intend to formally recognize her not simply as my companion, but as my equal partner in leading this territory forward. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the chamber, though notably absent was the hostility that had once dominated similar gatherings months earlier. Today, I ask this council to formally recognize the union between the Moon lineage and the Silverkin bloodline, Kale announced, merging two histories once thought destined for endless conflict into a partnership built upon genuine understanding, respect, and shared strength. Elena felt tears of genuine joy welling in her eyes as the council members, one by one, rose to offer their formal approval, the chamber filling with genuine warmth and celebration, rather than the fear and suspicion that had once threatened to destroy everything she held dear. Later that evening, standing once again beside the fountain where her abilities had first surfaced months earlier, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. From rejected Omega hiding in the shadows of Blackthorn territory, to standing proudly beside the Moon Heir as his equal and partner, she had transformed not only her own understanding of herself, but the entire territory's understanding of what genuine strength truly meant. You once told me something drew you to me that you could not fully explain, Elena said softly, turning to face Kale beneath the same moonlit sky that had witnessed so much of their journey together. I remember, Kale said, gently taking her hands into his own. I believe now, Elena continued, that perhaps it was never simply attraction or curiosity, but something deeper. Some ancient connection between our bloodlines finally finding its way back toward balance after decades of unnecessary conflict and fear. Kale smiled warmly, pulling her gently into his embrace. Whatever drew us together, Elena, I am endlessly grateful it did. Together we have already begun building something neither our bloodlines nor this territory has witnessed in generations. Genuine unity built upon truth rather than fear. As they stood together beneath the star-filled sky, the secret that had once threatened to destroy everything Elena held dear had instead become the very foundation upon which a brighter, more unified future would be built, proving that sometimes, the truths we fear most desperately to reveal become the very things that ultimately set us free.